start with the Heisenberg's approach to solving this problem. But before that, let us quickly summarize where we stand at the time of Bohr. Okay, so sorry, oh, my this thing is off, Bluetooth is off. Right, yeah. So Bohr's theory, a summary. So what exactly did Bohr do? So classically, so let us now write probably two columns: classical and Bohr's quantum theory. Okay, so classically, frequencies are due to radiation due to acceleration of charge. Okay, for simplicity of writing, I'll keep the charge to be a single electron, E. Okay, and the dE by dt is basically 2e squared by 3c cubed, is where this is the d squared r by dt squared. This is the acceleration. Okay, whereas in the Bohr's quantum theory, radiation, absorption and emission due to, so this is point number one, due to transitions. Okay, and the frequency of emission nu n to m is of the form okay. So this is the quantum formula, and this is the this is the quantum formula. Now classically, okay, classically, if you have a system that is described by Q1, Q2, so on to Qf, P1, P2 to Pf, then we can define Jf equal to, or Ji, under all the appropriate restrictions of the system being a periodic dynamical system, which is a bounded system, etc., etc. You can define over a full trajectory, you can define these variables. Then E is now a function of J1 to Jf alone. Okay, and the frequencies can now be defined as delta E by delta Ji. Okay, so these are the frequencies, and this from the Hamilton's equation is nothing but d theta I by dt. Okay, or there is probably a 1 by 2 pi somewhere, but let us call it omega I. Okay, so this is the idea. So now this formula here for large n, okay, for large n and small m, for large n and small m, if you write nu n going to n minus k for not small m, actually what we mean is n approximately equal to m. So n is also large for large n and m such that k is small. Okay, n minus m is small. Okay, in such a case, so this formula here also reduces to delta E by you can write this as follows. Okay, let me not skip steps here. Let me actually write it like this. Let me not skip to this point. So in the quantum theory, how do you determine En? En is basically, if you have f degrees of freedom, this n is a collective. It is denoted by f quantum numbers. So this is basically E, n1, n2, so on up to nf. Okay, there are f quantum numbers. This n is a collective index for all these f quantum numbers, and that is nothing but E of J1 equal to N1H, J2 equal to N2H, and so on, Jf equal to NFH. So you take every J in the classical theory and you replace it by N1H. Ji equal to NIH is the Bohr quantum condition. Right? This is how you arrive at the quantized energy levels in the Bohr case. And I'm going to actually give a homework where I will walk you through the steps that are involved in applying this quantum condition to a not so trivial problem like the hydrogen atom. Okay. For example, we already walked through this procedure for the harmonic oscillator. And since the harmonic oscillator has a very simple structure with only the energy as the conserved variable, quantization came out straight away with just one J, which is the area under the ellipse, which we could compute easily. In the case of the hydrogen atom, the integrals and other things will be a little more involved. You can take the help of Mathematica and other standard references. I'll also give you references where you can find the solutions for those integrals, and you will see that by doing the maths, you will get Bohr's quantum conditions for the hydrogen atom exactly. So Bohr applied this principle where you first write the system in terms of these action variables and then replace every action variable, classical action variable, with this quantization condition as some integer times the Planck's constant. And if there are f action variables, there are f quantum numbers. And a particular eigenstate, the energy of that eigenstate is now given by choosing a particular set of quantum numbers for each j. Okay, so this is the principle. Now consider, if you want to consider the frequency, okay, I said mu I is delta E by delta Ji, right? This is the classical formula. Now, in the quantum formula, if you now take nu of, let us fix all j's except one. Let us fix J2 to Jf except J1. Okay. Then nu, I'll call it nu1, okay, which is the frequency corresponding to J1, transitioning from N1 to N1 minus some K. Okay. N1 minus some K, where N1 is much larger than 1. That is in the large N1 limit. And K is much smaller than N1. In this limit, what does this formula become? This formula becomes E of J1 equal to N1H, J2 equal to N2H, so on up to Jf equal to NFH, minus E J1 equal to N1 minus KH, and all others will be the same, divided by H. Now what does that become? That becomes E. This is the definition for very small. If you do a Taylor expansion of the second thing, it just becomes KH times delta E by delta J1, right, divided by H. So if you cancel this, this becomes K times delta E by delta J1. So nu1 of N1 to N1 minus K is nothing but k times delta E by delta J1, and this is the kth harmonic. That is how we interpreted it, and this is the fundamental frequency. Therefore, nu1 becomes delta E by delta J1, which is exactly the classical formula. So this is how the correspondence works. Basically, the classical results and the quantum results agree in the large quantum number limit. Okay? Any questions on this? So this is the quantum formula, and this is the classical formula, and I just showed you that this formula agrees with this in the large quantum limit. And similarly, it's not just the frequencies. We also saw that. Now let's go back to the table again. So classical and Bohr. If you have a particular quantity expressed as a Fourier series, okay? For example, we saw the dipole moment P of t expressed as some Fourier series, some Ck e to the power of I 2 pi k nu naught t. Okay, where nu naught is some fundamental frequency and k times nu naught, as they are all the various harmonics. Then what does Bohr say about this Fourier series? One, the intensity, the transition from n to n minus k will be proportional to mod ck squared for large n. Okay, this is also something that we saw. And if any k is absent in the series,
excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. This A is it the transition rate, or?
It's the transition rate, yes.
But that transition rate was given by Einstein, you said now.
Well, Einstein was the one who suggested this, and Bohr also kind of adopted that suggestion. And this is how the interpretation is done. That is the transition. So why do we even need this transition rate? We need this transition rate because classically we are measuring an intensity of the radiation, whereas quantum, according to Bohr's theory, any emission of radiation is happening due to discrete transitions between a certain quantum level and another quantum level. So now, to kind of bridge these ideas, we need these transitions. If you take an ensemble that is a large collection of such atoms, each atom is undergoing a particular transition and with a certain probability. Now, if you take the average quantity, then the average quantity will agree with the classical result. That is the underlying hypothesis. And therefore, we need a sort of probability distribution for these transitions, which is given by this A. This was the suggestion made by Einstein, and this is how Bohr kind of interpreted the connection between the classical Fourier series and the quantum transitions. Now, again, in the homework that I will give you, you will see that a lot of information about the quantum structure of the atom can be gleaned from the classical Fourier series behavior. For example, a very classic result that emerged from the classical series Fourier series description of the motion of of the hydrogen atom and harmonic oscillator and all these problems is the notion of selection rules. Okay, if any k is absent in the series, then n to n minus k transition is prohibited. Therefore, selection rules. And the entire homework that I'm going to give you this week will be applying the Bohr principles, all these principles that I'm listing out, to the hydrogen atom, and you can gain a lot of information, and this explained a lot of the experimental phenomena. But only in a sort of qualitative way, and not in a very quantitative way, because the phenomena that people were observing in atomic spectra belonged to the small quantum numbers, and the correspondence that Bohr bridged with the classical physics was valid only for the large quantum numbers. Okay, so correspondence exists between classical and quantum descriptions, and a more straightforward word would be formulae at the large or in the large n limit, large quantum number. Okay, this was the observation, and there was a correspondence between these two. Any questions? And people applied. I mean, I want you to solve this homework that I'm going to give, so that you kind of get a first-hand appreciation for how Bohr's theory is applicable, and how much information can actually be gleaned from it about the internal dynamics of an atom, what transitions are allowed, what transitions are prohibited, etc., etc. And in the process, even those of you who will end up doing other streams and not physics will get a chance to solve the perhaps the most important I would say the last fully solved problem in physics. The last fully solved problem in physics is the problem of two bodies which are interacting with a 1 by r potential, which is the problem that Kepler and Newton and others solved 300 years back. Unfortunately, that turns out to be the only problem that has closed form solutions, or the last problem that had closed form solutions. All other problems later had only approximate solutions. That's because of this fundamental discovery in classical mechanics that the three-body problem is not integrable. Okay, so you have to stop with two bodies to get a full solution. And so you will get a flavor of how to solve the two-body problem in this homework. So this is the state of affairs at the time of Bohr. And the quantum condition was basically that Ji equal to integral Pi dqi is Ni times h. So this is the quantum condition, and Ni are specified to be integers. Okay. Now, Bohr himself was, he knew he was on the right track, but he knew this was not the complete theory. Now, there were reasons for why he felt this was not the complete theory, because one, the agreement was only at large quantum numbers. So there still was not a way in which you can predict things at small quantum numbers. Okay, so that was not there. Meaning, if you look at this Fourier series here, this Fourier series is a classical Fourier series. And this classical Fourier series gave you information through this probability, through this mod square of the Fourier coefficient being related to the probability of the transition for large n. Now, naturally, one question that you can ask is, what would be an equivalent quantity which would give you the probability for small n, and therefore actually work for the atomic transitions that we were observing in labs? Not some hypothetical large n transition which has a form, mathematical form, which agrees with the classical behavior and produces more or less harmonic radiation being some fundamental frequency and the higher harmonics, but does not really say anything, meaning this correspondence that we worked out has no validity for small n. So now all these problems are there, and Bohr, was like a man who had basically discovered a whole bunch of pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but doesn't know where to start to put them together. But he did discover various pieces, and they were all there, and he kind of knows that this will form a complete picture, but he has to now assemble it. He doesn't know how to assemble it. And a lot of people looked at this, and some people even asked questions like, well, the final theory should actually predict or should actually tell us the mechanism how this transition happens. Meaning, let us now ponder for a minute on this question. Let us say you have classically a nucleus and you have an electron that is going around the nucleus, right? Now this is the classical image of a hydrogen atom. Now naturally, Bohr has this notion of stationary states. That is the states En, the quantized discrete energy states En. Okay. Now you have E1, E2, E3, so sorry, like En. Now, classically, as the atom loses energy, what happens to the orbit? As the atom loses energy, this orbit shrinks. Okay? And it shrinks further, and finally the atom collapses into the nucleus. This is a problem. But Bohr assumed that while the atom is in this particular special state called the stationary state, the atom would not radiate, and the radiation will happen only when the atom makes a transition from one stationary state to another stationary state. And in the process, there would be an emission of a photon corresponding to the energy gap. But once it goes to the second stationary state, nothing else will happen. So the atom will remain stable, except during the transition where it goes from one stationary state to another stationary state. Now, what happens to the atomic orbit? If you compute the sizes of these orbits will of course depend on the quantum number. Therefore, the sizes of the orbits are changing. So in other words, this picture, the classical picture of contraction of the size of the orbit, is also true if you kind of take this picture that Bohr had for the internal dynamics of an atom in the quantum theory. Okay, so Bohr and others, after looking at all these questions, they felt, do we really need to come up with some other mechanism for the transition to happen than by just accepting the fact that these transitions happen, and if you so want to describe them in terms of the internal dynamics, you can just take the classical picture and say that the orbit size is shrinking or expanding depending on which direction the transition happens. The one critical new ingredient in the entire process is that there is a transition happening, which is not how classical theory describes. But the spectacular success that Bohr and others met, and the experiments by Frank Hertz and several other verifications, confirmed that there were indeed these transitions inside atoms, and this was no longer some hypothesis but a proven fact. All they needed now is a consistent theory which worked for all quantum numbers, especially the small quantum numbers, which were as of now only empirically described, but there was no way of predicting any of these intensities and other things for the small quantum numbers. So this is where, so for solving a jigsaw puzzle, there is really no method, right? You have to say, okay, I will start with some piece, and you have to discover the piece that matches it, etc., etc. And as you meet more and more success, the probability of you solving the puzzle becomes higher and higher. So this is where in research, creativity plays a role. Research is not all about logic, because if it were purely logical, the axioms of logic will have the entire logic embedded in them. It's only a matter of time for people to uncover that. Right? For example, if you take the axioms of geometry, there are a few axioms, like 6 or 7 axioms of Euclid. You take those axioms and all the theorems of geometry follow from them. In other words, the axioms of geometry have the entire theory kind of codified in them. Such an approach doesn't work for research in general, because you are not just, you are not given these axioms to start with. So creating an axiom requires creativity, and making these connections is a very creative process. And Heisenberg was a young 24-year-old student who had just, who was doing his PhD at that time under, I think he was doing with Sommerfeld. And Sommerfeld had sent Heisenberg to work with one of Bohr's, students, Bohr's collaborators, basically Niels Bohr's collaborator Kramers. And Kramers was trying to build this quantum theory at that point, and he had made some success in describing some problems, especially related to oscillators. And Kramers had this idea that what if an atom were actually inside a collection of different oscillators, but then experiments were not, showing any such harmonic behavior. So he was stuck. And that's when Heisenberg kind of went to work with Kramers, and he understood what Bohr's correspondence principle was. And he had a very wonderful idea. So he latched on to this simple principle that, well, classically, let us take any quantity like, say, position. And this is described by some Fourier series, right? And quantum mechanically or quantum theoretically, there was no word called quantum mechanics at that point, but according to Bohr's quantum theory, quantum correspondence, okay, according to quantum correspondence, the transition rate n to n minus k was proportional to mod ck squared for large n. And Bohr had already hinted that the full theory would not just be corresponding with classical physics for large n, but would also predict. What do I mean by that? The classical Fourier series can be worked out by solving the mathematical classical problem, and you can then predict the probability of transitions for these large n transitions to nearby levels. But this correspondence doesn't give you any information about what the probability for the small n transitions is, which is what we are observing in labs. So how do we then predict those? Then Heisenberg said, well, first we need a quantity which is like the Fourier component, but is valid now for all n. For large n, it should agree with the classical theory, and for small n, it should give the correct probabilities for the measured spectrum. So Heisenberg said, we need the equivalent of a Fourier component for small n transitions. Okay. Is this question clear to everyone? Any questions here? This is the idea. Or you have a whole bunch of problems. This is the problem that Heisenberg wanted to solve first. He said, let me use this correspondence principle as my guiding principle and try to construct a quantity. We don't know what the nature of that quantity is, but he called it a transition component, and this transition component is equivalent to the Fourier component. Okay, so that is the basic idea. So a transition component. So now he needs some clues which he had to now derive from Bohr's theory. Okay, so here we are going to use Heisenberg's notation, which is as follows. Okay, so for example, let us now write a table. This is now Heisenberg's table. Heisenberg's table. On the one hand, you have a classical formula. On the other hand, you are what he called a quantum theoretic formula. Okay. For example, so this coefficient here Ck, okay, Ck is the coefficient of the kth Fourier component, and this kth Fourier component is the kth harmonic. It is the coefficient of the kth harmonic of this fundamental frequency. Now, what does Bohr say about this fundamental frequency? So classically, mu naught is basically the large n limit of En minus En minus k by h, or En minus 1 by h. Right? This nu naught, the fundamental frequency, is classically for large n. For large n, if you take this formula, the quantum theoretic formula, and you construct En minus 1 by h, for large n, you get this fundamental frequency. Right? This is the Bohr's correspondence. So Heisenberg first introduced this notation. Thus this nu naught is basically, we will call it nu n, okay, 1. And k times nu naught then becomes nu n k. So this basically means in a large n orbit, okay, making a transition to n plus minus 1, that gives you a frequency nu naught. Making a transition to n plus minus k will give you a frequency k times nu naught. This is the notation. This is just a notation, by the way. He's not doing anything. He's not changing anything. And correspondingly, Ck will now be considered some, C n comma k in the same fashion. Okay. This is just a notation. So the classical Fourier series would just be a summation over k, C n comma k, e to the power of I 2 pi nu n comma k t. Anybody has any question? This is just a notation. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a small doubt here.
Yes.
You are saying that mu naught is capital En minus 1 by h for large n.
Yes.
This is classically true for the transition, right? From n state to n minus 1.
Correct.
Sir, but in the Bohr's atomic model, you also equate it to the frequency of its orbital motion.
Exactly. Purnendu. So the question, you are right that this nu naught is the frequency of the orbital motion classically, right?
Yes, sir.
Now what Bohr said is, if you take this for some large n, he doesn't specify what the large n is. He says for some large n, if you take the formula En minus 1 by h, basically here we did this. Okay?
Yes, sir.
That agrees. This delta E by delta J I is the orbital frequency classically. And he recovered that formula from the quantum condition as long as n is very large. Right?
Okay, sir. So classically, delta E by delta J is
Yes.
the orbital frequency.
Classically delta E by delta J is the orbital frequency. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So
And for
classically,
large n, that
exactly.
corresponds
Yeah,
to.
I should have started with that statement that nu naught would be some delta E by delta J for large n for classically. And if you take this formula, this becomes delta E by delta J for J equal to NH, evaluated at J equal to NH for large n.
Yes, sir. No, sir.
And that agrees with the classical, formula. It agrees with the classical formula. So the correspondence we are now building is between formulae. Just remember that. Okay, and this
Yes.
is an exercise with not real hope, but with some hope. Heisenberg did not have a clear idea that he is going to solve the problem, but he made a discovery in the process, which we are going to see. And this discovery was, quite profound. And later, Schrodinger is the one who created quantum mechanics as we know it today. He was the one who, even after Heisenberg, there were a lot of questions that remained. It was Schrodinger who took all the missing links and put them all nicely on a table and assembled the entire jigsaw puzzle and completed the picture. But before Schrodinger did that, 1 year before that, Heisenberg made a huge breakthrough, and that is what we are trying to walk along and find out what exactly is the breakthrough that he did. And the answer is known, okay? So the answer is that Heisenberg discovered that these quantities, these C and K, the Fourier coefficients that we have classically, the equivalent quantity that he is going to construct will satisfy the rules of matrix multiplications, and therefore they are matrices and they are not numbers. Classically, Fourier coefficients, the C of nks, are numbers. What Heisenberg is going to discover and what we are going to discover with Heisenberg is that the corresponding quantum quantities that he constructed, like a code breaker, he was basically doing a translation. He looked at the classical formula and he wrote down an equivalent quantum formula. He just wrote it down, and the principles that he followed were so trivial that you cannot disagree with them. So that's what we are going to see in a minute. So this is the notation that Heisenberg used first to describe the classical Fourier series, but in semi-quantum language. Semi-quantum language as you notice, there is an n here and we don't specify what n is. Okay? This comes from Bohr's correspondence for some large n. That is all Bohr said. For some large n, this Fourier coefficient will have some correspondence. Okay? And let us now look at what some of these properties of these nu nks are. Okay? Nu nk is firstly k times nu of n1. This we already know because nu n1 is the fundamental harmonic and k times nu n1 is nothing but nu nk. And nu n minus k is what? It is minus nu nk, right? nu n minus k is minus nu n k, because k times, whenever you see this expression, just put minus k times nu of n comma 1. This is the fundamental frequency. This is nothing but nu of n minus k, right? So basically, nu nk is k times nu n1. Nu n minus k is minus k times nu n1, which is nu n minus k, or which is minus nu of nk. All these are the various properties. Now, all the quantities we are interested in, all observable physical quantities like say position or momentum or energy, these are all real quantities. Now, what does reality imply for a Fourier series? So far I'm not writing anything on the right side of the column. I'm writing only on the left side of the column, because these are all consequences of the classical Fourier series. So if the quantity x of t is summation over k c nk, okay, e to the power of I 2 pi nu nk t, x is equal to x star, because it's a real quantity. So what does that mean? It means you can write this as c nk star should be equal to c nk, right? But c nk star is nothing but, can somebody tell me what this is? Cn minus k, right? Classically. Because this nu nk, you have to take the complex conjugate of this complex exponential. That becomes e to the power of minus 2 pi I nu nkt, and that just becomes nu n minus kt. And that becomes c, c of n minus k. So this equality has to hold. All right. Now think of this other quantity. Classically, nu of nk is nothing but k by h delta of E, the energy of n divided by j, but j is nothing, sorry, not j, divided by n, meaning partial derivative with respect to n. This is nothing but delta E by delta j, k times delta E by delta j, where j equal to nh. This is what I have written in this form. When I put j equal to nh, h is a constant, so I can bring it out. So this becomes k by h delta E by delta n, where E is now a function of n through nh. Okay. So this is the classical thing, right? Now you see, this frequency here is defined in terms of E, and E is defined for a stationary state. So there are two kinds of quantities that you encounter classically. There are these quantities which are defined for each stationary state, like the energy of a particular stationary state, and you have these frequencies and Fourier components and other things which are, from Bohr's quantum perspective, defined for transitions. The frequency of energy is radiated in a transition. So you have some quantities like energy which are defined in stationary states, and some quantities like frequency which are defined between stationary states for transitions. So these are largely the two kinds of quantities that you have in the Bohr's correspondence principle, right? And if you have, okay, so this formula here, in the quantum case, okay, we'll come to the quantum case. I'll write all the quantum formula on the right side. So let us not talk about that right now. But if you have a quantity like this, some k times delta by delta n of nu of nk. Let us say classically you have a quantity like this. Okay. Now this should be interpreted as, or not interpreted, I mean nu of nk is, you substitute it using this formula, k times delta by delta n of E of n. So it's a double derivative. So quantities like this are second derivatives of En, and quantities like this, frequency and other things, are first derivatives of En. Okay. So he first listed down all the classical properties of the classical Fourier series like this, and then he went about writing the quantum formula. So since there is no, the way I wrote it so shabbily, I don't have much room on the right side. So let me now, the quantum formulae It's always disappointing when you ambitiously want to write a 2-column thing and your handwriting just doesn't support it. So let us now make it a, yeah. So here you have summation over k c n k for some quantity. Let us take the representative quantity as x of t. Okay, so the position c of nk e power I 2 pi nu of nk t. So Heisenberg first wrote some quantity, he called it c of n minus k. Okay, and e to the power of I 2 pi nu n minus k t. The only difference is this is c n minus k, this is c n k, and this is nu n minus k, and this is nu nk. And nu nk is defined as k times delta E by delta n, and nu n minus k is defined as En minus En minus k by h. This is the correct quantum formula that holds for the small n. That is how Bohr made the discovery. By looking at the Balmer's formula and Rydberg's formula and other things, he discovered that this is the correct thing, and he also computed the energy levels of the hydrogen atom, which agreed with experimental results. So there should be some quantity Cnn minus k, which he called Cnn minus k, is called the transition component. This is all very abstract, okay? So this is the Fourier component. Classically, this is the Fourier component and this is the transition component. All right, at least the way I'm writing it, a 2-column thing is now taking shape. So let us hope I can sustain this. Then, okay. Let us now look at nu n minus k is minus nu n minus nu n k classically, right? So let me be ambitious again. And what did he say? What did Heisenberg say? Okay, in the quantum case, this is the formula. This is nu n minus k. Okay, nu n minus k should be minus nu n minus k n. Why? Because this, if you apply, if you write E of n minus E of n minus k by h, right? The negative of this will be E of n minus k minus E of n by h. So wherever you see nu of n minus k, in the classical case you just substitute, you just write that equal to minus nu of nk. In the quantum case, wherever you have in the classical case nu of n minus k, you have to interchange the two indices of this frequency, because if you want to go to the negative frequency, you have to now reverse the stationary states, basically in the quantum case. Okay. Now, classically, C of n comma k is C star of n minus k. Again, this is from the reality condition, right? So what does this correspond to quantum theoretically? C of n minus k. Okay. Again, just to avoid confusion in the notation, I'm going to call C here and I'm going to call it CQ here, which is the quantum. I'll call it nu q instead of, okay? That will at least not at some later stage not make me interchange the symbols by mistake. So in the quantum case, whatever this quantity is, we don't know what it is, CQ n minus k should be CQ star of n minus k, right? So we just simply say it should be n minus k n. Okay. Now, those of you in a rush to get to the final answer may already claim victory and say, oh, we have two indices here, so any object with two indices is a matrix. Well, in this notation, this also has two indices, and we know for sure that classical Fourier coefficients are numbers. So at least from a very trivial logic, I can say that writing something with two indices doesn't automatically make it a matrix. We have to show some properties of these matrices and show that the properties are like that of matrices, and only then we have confirmed that this is indeed a matrix. Okay. Now, this is all about frequencies and Fourier components. Now Heisenberg used his creativity and said, frequency classically is k by h delta E by delta n, right? And we already wrote the quantum expression. He now extended it for any quantity, f of n, which is now defined in a stationary state. If you have delta f n by delta n, okay, if you have delta this sort of a quantity, okay, if you have any such quantity, this in the quantum formula has to now be substituted by f of n minus f of n minus k by h. Or in other words, if you even remove this by h, because there is by h on both sides, this quantity has to be replaced by this quantity. Okay, and if you now have the second derivative, okay, now consider the second derivative of this frequency. which we saw classically. Let me write this again. So I want you to note the following. Until here, these are all energies, frequencies, which had direct mention in Bohr's theory. Now Heisenberg is using this is how creativity comes into play, to take an existing thing and extend it by making a sort of illogical leap, but a hopeful leap. Okay. And the hope is that if you have, other than energy, there are several quantities which are defined in the stationary state. For example, angular momentum, etc., etc. Now, for any such quantity, which is a general representation, is this f of n. If you have a classical formula which looks like this, in the quantum case, you replace it by a simple difference. Okay? And again, now consider the classical formula. By the way, this is not something, I'm not distilling something from Heisenberg's paper and giving you some abridged version. This is exactly how Heisenberg proceeded. So he was working as a translator of sorts. He wanted to cook up a quantum formula. His goal was not to explain some fundamental physics. He wanted a formula which worked for all n. And he knew that these formulae of these difference type worked for all n, and they corresponded to the classical formula for large n also. So he said, look, let me just stick to those and try to construct. So if you now have this has to now classically be described as k delta by delta n of delta by delta n of E of n, right? Now this has certain properties. Sign change of k leaves this invariant. This is a property of the classical formula. Now whenever you have a derivative like this, here is, I will write two possible formulae in the quantum case. One case is the following. You have delta, this quantity here, which I can write as En minus En minus k by h, or rather I'll remove the h, I'll just say it is this, okay, and I have k times delta by delta n of this. Now if you just apply the rules of derivative, can't I write this as En minus En minus k minus En minus k minus E of n minus k? Can't I write it like that? Or this is one way to write a second difference. The second derivative in the continuous case, in the discrete case becomes the second difference. Or there is another way to write it. Okay. En plus k minus En minus En minus En minus k. These are two ways of writing a second derivative. Anybody who has worked with numerical differentiation knows that if you have a second derivative, there is a one-sided or an asymmetric definition of the second derivative as a difference. There is also a symmetric definition. Now we are at crossroads. Which of these will you pick? Heisenberg said you have to pick this and not this. Why? Because this property is not valid for the first formula. If you change the sign of k, the first formula will not be symmetric. So you have to pick the second case. So he said every second derivative, like what we have on the left side, will now be replaced by this. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so similarly, any questions on this?
Did he give any general formula for like kth derivative or jth derivative like that?
No, no need. He just gave it for the second derivative, because mostly he did not really bother going that far. But you can follow the same principles and you can construct those formulae also. But he only, in his paper, he only explicitly wrote down the second derivative formula, and that turns out to be enough for us. And I'll tell you why at a later point. We will. This is the topic for this class and the next class. So this is what we'll be looking at. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So k times now e power n plus k minus en minus en minus k. This is the, and this can be shown. This is nothing but nu of n plus kn, right? Nu of n plus kn minus nu n minus k. So if you have k delta nu of nk by delta n, such a quantity should be replaced by this difference. This first term here is nu n plus kn in the quantum formula. Second term is nu n minus k. So if you have a derivative of the difference, a derivative of the frequency, it has now become the difference of the two transition frequencies in the quantum case. And again, he extended it to general quantities. So if you have a general quantity which is defined in transition, for example, k delta of delta n, for example, the C, the Fourier component, which is again defined only for a transition, right? This should now be in the classical, in the quantum case, become C n plus k n minus C n minus k.
So
All right.
Also, the subscripts Q.
Sorry. See, this is, yeah, you're right. Good, thanks. I mean, no matter, how careful you are, these are things that happen. All right. Now, are you willing to spend 5 more minutes so that we can finish how Heisenberg discovered matrices, or do you want to have that punchline in the next class? It's up to you. We are there. We are literally 2 steps away.
Sir, maybe revealing the secret would be better.
You don't want to, you can't deal with a cliffhanger or what? Fine. Let us then spend maybe 10 more minutes and finish it. I won't hold you longer than that. Is that okay? Unless somebody is fainting with hunger, I don't want to cause any health emergencies. So feel free to tell me if you want to have this in the next class. On Wednesday, we can at least. So, all right. If I will take the silence to mean agreement with going forward. So this
Excuse me,
is.
sir, I have one confusion. So like, if we take the Taylor expansion of like en minus k, that term that it comes out to be 0.
Sorry.
Sir, like for the derivative case, like this.
This one.
Sir, if we next one, this
Next
that
one.
en plus k, like if you Taylor expansion, that comes out to be 0.
Oh, no. You should not do the Taylor expansion. That's the whole point, right? The quantum formulae are purely differences. The Taylor expansion is valid only in the large n case. In the large n case, these you know, second derivatives are anyway not going to matter. Those are already second order, you know, processes, right? Which have, for very small k, you are going to ignore them anyway. So only the first derivative matters in those cases. But in the small n case, he just wanted to have a consistent expression that you can write for all such quantities in the small n case also. That's all. That's the exercise that he's doing. Is that clear? In the quantum formula, you cannot take derivatives. These are purely differences. But for large n, these differences will become derivatives. That's just a mathematical property for large n. But this formula is exact. Is that clear, Anirudh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So now we are at a very critical juncture. Let us now look at, we have now laid down in a particular Fourier series, okay, C of nk, that is, let us say x of t, e to the power of I 2 pi mu n comma k t. This is the classical Fourier series for x of t. And we have kind of written down the corresponding quantities for the quantum case. How do we deal with x squared of t? Classically, how do you deal with x squared of t? You say C of k nk e to the power of I 2 pi nu n comma k t, and you take another copy of it but with some other dummy index, C of n comma k prime e to the power of I 2 pi nu n comma k prime t. Isn't it? This is how you construct x squared, right? This becomes a double summation k prime C of nk, C of nk prime e to the power of I 2 pi nu of nk plus nu of nk prime, which is nothing but k times nu of 1 plus k prime times nu of 1, which can be written as nu of nk plus k prime t. Is everybody happy with this formula? Okay, okay. This formula is clear, right? This summation essentially becomes this, because nu of nk plus nu of nk prime classically is, since this is the reason, nu of, it is k times nu of n1 plus k prime of nu of n1. This is k plus k prime of nu of n comma 1. This is nothing but nu of n k plus k prime. This is how I have written it. This goes into this exponent here. Now what we can do is define k plus k prime. Okay, define k plus k prime equal to some k double prime. Then I have k, and I have k, instead of k prime, I am now going to write, yeah, I can write this as k double prime. Okay, summation over k double prime, C of nk, C of n k double prime minus k, and I get e to the power of I 2 pi nu n comma k double prime t, right? If k and k prime go the entire ranges, k double prime will also go the entire range. There is no, k and k prime go from minus infinity to infinity in the Fourier series. So this k double prime will also go from minus infinity to infinity. There is no problem about it. And now I'm going to interchange these two, and I'm going to write this as summation over k minus infinity to infinity, C of n comma k, C of n comma k double prime minus k. This is one quantity. And on the outside, I have the k double prime summation, which is e to the power of I 2 pi nu n k double prime t, where k double prime goes from minus infinity to infinity. Now I'm going to make another change of variables where I'm going to call, this is a relabeling. I call k prime, k double prime k, and k as k prime. Nobody is stopping me from doing it. So I can now write this as summation over k, and inside I'll have a summation over k prime, c of n k prime, c of n k minus k prime, and outside I have 2 pi nu n k t. Let me call this C2, okay, of n k. Okay, I'm calling this summation C2, just a different notation. So now I have summation over k, C2 of n k, e to the power of I 2 pi nu of n k t. So what did we just discover? That classically, this is all purely classical analysis. If I have a Fourier series which is given by this particular Fourier expansion, the square variable, that is, if x of t is given by that Fourier expansion, x square of t, this is x square of t, is given by a very similar Fourier expansion where the C2 of nk are nothing but summation over k prime over all minus infinity to infinity, c of nk prime and c of n k minus k prime. That is the definition of C2. Okay, but more importantly, C2, sorry, this x squared also has the same Fourier components. This was the entire basis on which we said that if you have a periodic process with a certain frequency, fundamental frequency nu naught and higher harmonics, all processes related to this variable will have the same Fourier series, and therefore the energy emitted will also have the same Fourier components. This is the same logic, right? So the Fourier components in this x squared variable will also be the same. Now, how do you construct the quantum equivalent of x squared? Okay, I'm going to show this and leave you today to absorb what we have done today. Okay, so let us now construct the quantum equivalent. So we have x of t equal to summation of k, c of nk, e to the power of I 2 pi nu nk t. This is the classical formula. Let's call it xq of t will be summation over k cq n minus k e to the power of I 2 pi nu q n minus k t. This is the quantum equivalent Fourier series expansion. Now I want to construct xq squared. How do I write xq squared? Okay, so I can write it as summation over k cq n minus k e to the power of I 2 pi nu q n minus k t, and I go exactly the same way, right? Summation over k prime cq n minus k prime e to the power of I 2 pi nu q n minus k prime t, and now I multiply summation over k prime cq n minus k times cq n minus k prime times e to the power of I 2 pi nu q n minus k t, plus nu q n minus k prime t. Here is where Heisenberg stopped and said, I have to now do a relabeling to cast it in a form similar to the classical formula. Why is this required? Again, because if this formula for large n, if it has to reduce to the classical formula, I better start with an expression which has some similar properties to the classical formula. It better not be something completely alien so that it can never reconcile with the classical formula for large n. In other words, this has to have a form summation over k some CQ2, okay, some CQ2 n minus k e to the power of I2 pi nu q n minus k t. It should, right? Is there any objection to this particular? So xq squared should have a Fourier series which looks like this, so that it looks exactly like this formula. Is there any objection to that requirement? I hope that is clear, the reasoning. Now look at, okay, classically nu of nk plus nu of nk prime is nu of n k plus k prime, right? Quantum mechanically, is this equal to, okay, so what is this equal to? It's very easy to verify. It is En minus En minus k plus En minus by h minus En minus k prime by h. This is some very meaningless expression, right? So you have to be careful. What I'm trying to get at is the relabeling has to be done carefully in the quantum case so that you ultimately get an expression like this, which means so let us now look at the properties of this. So this nu q, sorry, the nu q is basically this quantity, okay? So in classical case, we relabeled the quantities in such a way nu of nk prime plus nu of nk minus k prime eventually gave us nu of nk classically. But in the quantum theoretic expression, nu of n to n minus tau, sorry, n minus k plus nu of n minus k to n minus k prime will give us nu of n to n minus k prime. This can be easily verified. That is, if you write it in this fashion, so you write E of n minus E of n minus k minus E of n minus k minus E of n minus k prime, right? E of n minus E of n minus k minus E of exactly. Sorry, we are not taking a minus. We are actually doing a plus here. Yeah, this is a plus. So this these two will cancel, and you get E of n minus n minus k. Sorry, n minus k prime, which will give you nu of n transitioning to n minus k prime. This is the combination rule that is applicable in quantum physics, quantum theory. This is the combination rule that is applicable in classical theory. So what Heisenberg said is, let us choose the relabeling in such a way that the quantum combination rule is satisfied. And that immediately means, okay, okay, so now if you look at this expression here, which is the quantum Fourier series expansion for the classical, Fourier series, you should have this. I'm going to write down the answer and I want you to work it out. We will come back to this in the next class, okay? So the C2Q or the CQ2 should now have the form summation over K C of n minus K, okay, summation over K prime, okay, CQ2 of nk. This is what we are interested in. Remember that this is what we are interested in. CQ2 of n minus K. Sorry, that's what. CQ2 of n minus K. n minus K should be of the form C of n minus K prime, okay, C of n minus K prime times C of or CQ of n minus K prime times CQ of n minus K prime times n minus comma n minus K. Okay. If this combination rule holds, then we have x squared, xq squared will be C summation over K CQ2 of n minus K e to the power of I 2 pi nu n minus K t. Now look at this formula here. Summation over K prime CQ, this is the formula for CQ2. CQ n minus K prime CQ n minus K prime n minus K. If you now write this as CQ n, the n minus kth element, n minus K prime element of a matrix, this is exactly the matrix multiplication rule. Okay, this is exactly the matrix multiplication rule, and this is not the matrix multiplication rule. For example, if you see the classical case, this is not the matrix multiplication rule, because here these indices are not according to the matrix multiplication rule. Whereas here, how do you multiply a matrix A, which is Ij, and a matrix B, which is also a square matrix? You take Aij times Bjk and you sum over all j. This is how you multiply matrices. This is exactly that. N minus K prime is what is being summed over. So CQ2 is the matrix multiplication of these CQs. So now we started by saying we don't know what CQ is, but then Heisenberg discovered that the CQ should have the properties of a matrix. Okay, and I want you to fill in the steps. This is a very simple rearrangement going from here. You know, this from here to here. Do the relabeling and use this principle that we just wrote down here and show that to get the correct form of the Fourier series like this, the coefficients CQ have to now satisfy this combination rule. Okay? Do this. It's a simple mathematical jugglery, but this is how CQ of n minus K is a matrix. In other words, what we started doing was to write the quantum theoretical equivalent for the position of a particle, and we found that the quantum equivalent of the Fourier series of this position of the particle essentially had properties of a matrix, whereas the classical Fourier series was simply numbers. And later in history, these matrices were what were started being called operators. Okay, all this and more in the coming lectures, but this is the ultimate idea, how Heisenberg landed on matrices, and for some strange reason this entire beautiful mapping that he did and the sort of interesting puzzle solving exercise that he did is never mentioned in classes. And the way it is taught is, oh, classically things are numbers, and quantum mechanically things become operators. Nobody wakes up one morning thinking, oh, I should probably replace these numbers by operators. A lot of trial and error, a lot of creativity, and a lot of simple logical reasoning based on some hopeful successes of the previous incomplete theory have to add up coherently to lead you up to there. And then, of course, in the process, Heisenberg used a lot of creativity, but that was not unfounded. It was not a serendipitous, dream that he had one night and he woke up and said, operator, operator. It was not like that. So I just wanted you to appreciate how matrices come into play in quantum mechanics, and this is how they come into play. And now from the next class, we will see how Schrodinger and de Broglie approached the whole problem and actually Schrodinger constructed all of classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, which went beyond Heisenberg and made it mathematically very simple. Okay, so with that, sorry for taking the extra time today, but this is the essence. Any questions? All right. So it is just a relabeling exercise, but out of the relabeling, we want. So the reason why we impose this condition on these CQs is because we want a final form which looks like this. And what is the motivation for this final form? It's very simple. It is the closest you can write to a classical Fourier series. By the same logic, he applied for x of t. X squared of t is also a similar quantity. So the Fourier series should now have a correspondence, like in the case of x of t, which requires now these quantities C2, which are obviously related to the original Fourier series of x of t, to have a peculiar form. And that peculiar form is the form of matrix multiplication. It's not the form of simple number multiplication. And therefore, the CQ of NT, NK, N minus K are no longer simple numbers, but they have to be multiplied according to the rules of matrix multiplication. All right, so I will leave you here to absorb what we have done. We have done all of Heisenberg's derivation today. So it will take you a few minutes to absorb it. So look at that. I'll share this notes and other things. I'll also share Heisenberg's paper. I warn you, don't venture into reading it. It is a rather difficult paper. The notation, the symbols used are Gothic format, Gothic fonts. So they are not very easy to read, but the essence of it is exactly what I just discussed. Those of you who are historically minded can go and read it at a later time. All right, thanks.